Welcome to the Computational Antitrust podcast. My name is Thibaut Schrepel. I am a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center, an associate professor of law at the VU Amsterdam, and the creator of the Computational Antitrust project, which explores how legal informatics can benefit antitrust law. The project, as you may know by now, brings together over 65 competition agencies and 35 academics in the advisory board. Each month or so, we publish an academic article on the subject of computational antitrust. You may find all of those publications in open access at computationalantitrust.com. Today, I am thrilled to be receiving Teodora Groza to co-host this episode with me. Teodora is our brilliant editor-in-chief and also a PhD candidate at Sciences Po in Paris. And today's episode is actually a bit special because we are discussing a report that Teodora and I edited, as opposed to the usual format in which we interview academics about their articles for us. So as you may have seen already, we indeed asked all of the antitrust agencies that are parts of the Computational Antitrust project to send us a short contribution explaining the use they make of computational tools. We ended up with 14 contributions for this year. The report is also open access, only 39 pages long on our website. And in it, you will learn about where agencies are investing in computational antitrust, network analysis, machine learning, system to streamline their processes, etc. All the things that we will be discussing today. So the plan is actually the following. First, Teodora and I will give you an overview of what's inside the report. Then we will be discussing the trends that we'll see. So we will try to take a step back. And finally, we will explain where we think agencies should and could invest more resources in the future. So all that behind us, without further ado, let us get started. First, Teodora, welcome to the podcast. I am thrilled to welcome you here after all the work that you've done for the project. Very important question, I suppose, nowadays. How are you and where are you?
Hi, Thibaut. It's my pleasure to be part of this podcast. So I'm currently in my hometown, located in Romania, and fortunately, we are not having that much of a heat wave here. So I think I'm doing much better than many of our listeners. Before we get started, I'm going to return the question back to you. How are you and where are you and how are you coping with the heat?
Yeah, I'm doing well. A bit tired because we welcome a new family member. We also moved a week ago, still in Amsterdam, so that's where I am. It's very hot outside, but according to Dutch standards. So I grew up in south of France, and the weather that we have today was actually the normal for 3 months straight. So I'm doing okay. Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, excellent. So I think let's dive into the report and what's in it and the reason why we are so excited to publish this report. And in fact, I think it will be a good idea to start with an overview of what's inside so we know what we talk about. I am personally fascinated to see that antitrust agencies are making fantastic progress. And in fact, we knew that some agencies were very well advanced in the space. But some other agencies which never communicated anything on the subject of computational antitrust are actually also making fantastic progress. All that you can find in a report. So this is my overall take, but I'm curious to hear about your overall impression and to give us a sense of what's in it.
Sure. So I fully share in your excitement. The report is indeed fantastic. What it contains is basically contributions from competition agencies from Argentina to the UK. So, in that sense, it's as diverse as it could be, in which the agencies explain their use of computational tools. These contributions are, in fact, very granular. They explain what kind of softwares are being used, what their functions are, and also the concrete benefits which these softwares bring to the day-to-day enforcement of antitrust. And in addition to these descriptions of the state of play, some agencies have also shared with us their projects for the future, which is very exciting. Others were very honest and they outlined which challenges they face and how they're trying to overcome these challenges. Now that we have an idea of how the report looks like, I'd like to ask you, Thibaut, about what you think the relevance of the report is who can benefit from it and how, and who should read it?
I think actually the report achieves a goal of the project to bring something that could be helpful to agencies and to companies at the same time. So for the agencies, I think they can learn from what other agencies are doing. They can read the report and get ideas about what's possible in 2022, where they can invest without much technical expertise, and in fact, without a team of 50 employees, because not all of the agencies can afford that, unfortunately. So in a sense, I would say that the report is a perfect introduction to what is feasible today when it comes to computational antitrust. And should you have the means to invest in the space, what you get a sense of is where bigger agencies can actually advance not only what we see in computational antitrust, but also when it comes to computational law and the automation of the law. And as you indeed said, some agencies are very open about the fact that they are facing challenges. So I like the report for this reason as well. So that's what I wanted to say for the agencies. On the side of the companies, and of course their counsels as well, so practicing lawyers and in-house counsels, I think they will benefit from the reports on two fronts. First, they will better understand what the agencies are doing, which I suppose, being a practicing lawyer, is always something that you may want, and better understand how they function, also how to cooperate with those agencies. And what I want to say, and this is an issue that I think will become relevant in the future, but not in 2022, I do not think that any company can read the report and understand how to escape antitrust. This is not what you get out of the report. What you can understand is again, how agencies are working, how to better cooperate with those agencies, how to align your processes with those agencies, etc. That's the first front. The second one is that, of course, for the agencies and for even the law firms, they can also get a few tricks about where they could start computing antitrust. And I think the report will give them a fair sense of the tools they can invest in and the ideas to increase compliance for their clients, how to better understand the case law, how to speed up their processes, etc. So that's what I wanted to mention for the practicing world, the outside world. For the inside world, at least in my world, the academic one, I can't help but mention that I think the report is providing us with a lot of things we may want to explore. But for now, let me just mention that I've heard some people being worried, and I understand why, that agencies will never be able to adapt to digital markets. And I think the report is actually answering those doubts and actually proving not them wrong, but that the concerns are legitimate, of course, but that agencies are moving fast as well. I've heard that agencies cannot compute the law, or that in fact no one can compute antitrust law, or that computing antitrust law will be a doorway to more discrimination and more unfairness. I share the concern, and in fact most of our publications deal with those subjects, which are crucial. But you also see that, again, agencies are aware of that, which is good news. And the last point is that I've heard that antitrust is too slow and that we need per se rules for that reason, and regulation. And again, the report, I think, shows another possible path. So this is my best take at who should read the report and what you can get out of it. But now I'm curious to hear about your take on it.
So I'm going to start by agreeing with you, especially on the point that this report represents, in a way, exactly the crux of our project, in the sense that it benefits the whole antitrust community, from agencies to scholars and law firms. But I want to start by saying that the report is really the first of its kind, and it's worth reading just for its innovative character, in the sense that it's the first time when competition agencies have given the public the chance to understand in this level of detail where exactly they're using computational tools and also what their plans are for the future. And I really think that, as you said, each stakeholder has something to learn from the report. The agencies have even the chance to learn from each other and to understand where they could potentially pool their resources to advance computational tools. And I'm very happy to see how many of their progresses overlap. And I really think that here with this project, we're actually creating a learning community, which is fantastic and which was one of our initial aims to begin with. In terms of the academic world, of which both of us are part of, I think the report gives us the chance to adapt our work to the needs of the agencies. And in this sense, the report really bridges the gap between academia and enforcement and enables us to have a constructive dialogue where we actually answer to what the agencies need, and then they can also implement our work. But we'll talk a bit more about that further on. I really think that our answers put together have convinced everyone listening to us to read the report. And now that we've gathered such a broad readership, I think it's time to have a closer look at what's actually inside. So, Thibaut, can you maybe discuss the trends you see in the report, the technologies which are most commonly used, and the issues which are being addressed?
Sure. I won't pretend that I don't have a list in front of me, because I do, because there is a lot in it. But before that, I just want to react to what you just said. I think, of course, we were very pleased to see that some agencies were saying basically that they invested in the space because of the project, and they mentioned the project and our publications, which is good because it goes one way. But indeed, as you mentioned, it may also go and it should actually go the other way around, right? Where we learn about where the agencies are struggling, and maybe that's something that we should take into consideration when constructing grant proposals or writing papers and books and so on and so forth. So it's a beautiful feedback loop, which I like very much. But to answer your question, and again, yes, I do have a list because there is a lot I want to cover. I tried my best to cluster all the inputs that we received into different sub areas of antitrust. So what we see is that several agencies are mentioning the fact that they are working on implementing document management systems. So to name a few, Argentina developed a system for case handlers to get real-time reports about the cases they are investigating. El Salvador has a software to allow search within documents after the downgrades, something they have designed for the purpose. The UK, that I will name quite a few times, has a system called ESP that can take in millions of documents and check if they are in the right format and process those documents all at the same time. So that's cluster number one. Cluster number two, we see that agencies are investing in computational tools to better understand the markets. So they look at the outside world. Here we do have Brazil, who developed graphs on corporate relationships between companies, something that we see a lot of agencies are investigating. The Czech Republic also created a similar system. France has developed something that they called the Open Archive terms, in which they keep track of all of the terms and conditions of the big platforms and try to understand their evolution. And this could be, of course, a way to better understand what they do out there on the market. The same agency is also working on network analysis. So also something to better understand where we see the market is going, especially when it comes to anti-competitive practices. The UK has been quite active when it comes to using computational tools to understand mobile ecosystems, also digital advertising. So what they've done is that they automatically processed very large data sets, and they also invest in understanding ownership structures. So this issue of minority shareholding is actually a big one, something that we see coming quite a few times in the report. That was cluster number two. Number three, public procurement. This is where I'm not sure if it's where it all started, but for sure, agencies and the academics actually have been investigating the space for at least 15 to 20 years. So Brazil has developed a data mining technique to detect bid rigging in public procurement. Colombia also developed a system to detect cartels where they use deep learning. The Czech Republic uses machine learning to also detect collusion in those public procurements. Singapore developed something using natural language processing, which, as you may know by now, is a form of machine learning, but focused on the language. And Spain is clustering tenders to see if they can actually identify similarities between those tenders. I'm almost done. Cluster number 4, merger control. This one is a bit smaller, maybe to my surprise. Armenia is developing a tool to automatically detect mergers above the threshold. And the way they do that is that they get access to several of the state agencies' data sets, including the size of the companies, their activities, and if they merge, well, automatically they will get a red flag. And the UK developed specific data and technology-focused theories of harm. So this one is actually specifically interesting to me because you see that something we mentioned quite a few times in this podcast, the use of computational tools is actually also changing the substance of antitrust. Very last cluster, cluster number 5, anti-competitive practices, and especially the detection of those practices. So what do we see? First, Australia is developing technique to cluster documents with common themes. They use NLP to analyze those documents. They also use NLP to analyze consumer complaints to see if they can identify trends amongst those complaints. El Salvador invested also last year in detection tools using computational power. Greece is reportedly using web scraping plus visualization tool plus digital forensic to better identify anti-competitive practices. Mexico has developed or at least upgraded open source software for forensic, something we discussed in our annual conference. Should the agencies develop the software on their own? Should they work on the basis of open source? Should they go for a private solution? So you here have the stance of Mexico. The UK is also developing web scraping for online reviews, for instance, something they've done successfully. And last, Colombia has developed price monitoring tool where they scrape the data out of a supermarket website. So I'm very sorry for this very long rant, but this is not to give you a very specific look at each of those solutions, but to give you an overview of what's possible. And of course, should you want to learn more about any of those items, you could just go and read the report, which is, again, open access. So I'm exhausted right now, but I'm curious to hear out of all that, which one, when you first read the report and edited the report, was the most interesting to you or surprising, something that will stick to your mind? Because it's been quite a few weeks now that we worked on it. So what's there for you?
So I want to start by thanking you for your very exhaustive answer, which I'm sure has led to some of our readers starting to take notes to remember all the clusters that you've very carefully identified, and I think which are very helpful to sort of understand where the agencies are investing most of their resources. So a couple of things which surprised me in a very positive way. First, you mentioned that most agencies by now have switched to having electronic records for all of their documents. What I found really interesting and very positive is that some agencies have actually integrated these records with other state registries, such as those of the tax authorities or even the commercial registry. And I think that this not only helps simplify the daily work of the case handlers in the sense that they don't have to do a lot of phone calls between the other tax authorities or commercial registries, but it also gives them a more holistic picture of how markets look like, not only from an antitrust perspective, but also from a corporate law perspective and even tax law. So I think that's really fantastic. And then talking about procurement and bid rigging and all of that, I was very surprised to see that the Brazilian agency is now pursuing an investigation which is drawing entirely on data collected through data mining techniques. And I think this is really fantastic, and it proves that computational tools also help in terms of substance, in the sense that they don't only simplify the day-to-day work, but they also lead to new investigations. And I'm sure we'll see many more of these investigations building entirely on the results of computational tools in the coming years. And lastly, and I know this is something you also mentioned, but I'm very happy to see how competition agencies are analyzing corporate relationships and also assessing risks of collusion based on ownership structures. And it's really fantastic to see how the agencies are doing this really groundbreaking work at the intersection of corporate governance and antitrust. And of course, we see a lot of that in academia in terms of common ownership and all of that debate. But it's really positive to see how even the enforcement side is slowly catching up on that. So I think we have a lot of things to look forward to in the future, and all of these trends are really positive and really exciting. And on that note, I think it's time to move from the present to the future. So, Thibaut, how do you think our future reports will look like? Where do you expect agencies to make progress?
Sure. Let me actually try to bridge the present and the future here, and more specifically regarding Brazil. I think the decision will be actually very important indeed, and the way they will structure the data, investigate the practices, analyze the practices, and actually prove the practice to be or not, by the way, anti-competitive, will be very important also for the companies. Not only because it means that, of course, the agencies are becoming very agile and that the companies should be more careful or, well, preferably not infringe antitrust. But, as a matter of fact, most of the companies, a very, very large majority of those companies does not want to infringe antitrust. It's not the reason why they have created a company in the first place. And what you see sometimes, and especially if you practice a bit, is that most practices are actually, on the edge of being anti-competitive or pro-competitive. It's really hard to tell sometimes. And it could be that Brazil will actually give us some sort of clue as to where companies and their councils could develop similar tools to monitor their practices and identify, whether or not they are infringing antitrust, even before the agency may notice the fact that they do so. And this is where to come to your question, I see potential progress in which I think we could do even a better job at bridging the side of the competition agencies and the companies. And I could see where agencies could develop computational tools for companies, not only for them and better function, which is excellent, but also for the companies to be able to be better compliant or improve, or reduce the burden that antitrust may present. So to give a few examples, I could see how computational tools could help with merger processes, with sort of a form where you could enter the data and get a sense. It won't be perfect, but get a sense of whether you need to notify the merger, whether this might be problematic. We have published scholarship on the micro directive by Nibet and Casey, and I think this is the type of stuff that agencies could implement and provide the company with. Similarly, I think we have enough data to compute a relevant market definition, especially now with the advances in the space of natural language processing, and provide the companies with a data set of all the delimitation that agencies have performed in the past. We could think about API, but we do have a forthcoming article on the subject, so something for in a few weeks. So that's the first space where I see potential improvement in the future. Number two, network analysis. So some agencies, as I mentioned, are investing the space, but I think this is where all agencies could start because they have the data. Why is that? Because the data is actually their own data, because here we are talking about their own case law. So should you take your own case law, label the case law, and analyze the trends amongst your past cases, I think this could be relevant information for the agencies to understand, one, what's happening on the market, and two, what they need to do best, right? Because it might be that if you see a decline in the amount of tying cases, it doesn't mean necessarily that there are less tying practices on the market. It might be that you need to invest more resources in trying to identify those practices. So this is something I think all agencies could invest because it basically requires 1 or 2 employees and pretty much no technical expertise, or at least a limited technical expertise. And the third one is complexity science. I think that algorithmic thinking is more dynamic than algebra. Now, once you've said that, and many people have complained over the years that computational is too static, which might be true, but I think it's too easy to blame it on the agencies, because when it comes to dynamic competition, we don't really have the tools right now to understand what's happening on the market. And I see no other way around but to invest in computational tools if you want to understand the market dynamics. So complexity, as you may know, relates to the work of Darwin, and it's very preeminent in biology. But I would love to see more of that being used in antitrust. The very last paper that we published, actually just a few days ago, is explaining how we could use complexity science to better understand anti-competitive practices in the blockchain space. And I cannot possibly believe that in 10 years from now, no agency will use agent-based modeling, which is a way to understand and document complexity. Not necessarily to predict the future, because you will always see the black swans, the events that are impossible to predict, but maybe just to better understand the market dynamics of the present days. So I've been wrong many times, so don't take it for something that will have happened for sure. But yes, again, network analysis, computational tools for companies, and complexity science, I think, is where we may see progress in the future. And now I'm curious to hear if there anything that I listed that would be on your list, or which other ideas do you have actually?
So I found your idea of sort of a do-it-yourself antitrust, where the companies receive the tools from the competition agencies, to be very mind-blowing. And I think that companies would be really happy if in the future they would be able to self-assess compliance with competition law, because that would save them a lot of admin costs and so on. So it's really interesting to see whether you are right about that one. And I'm really looking forward to see what the future will show us. Now, I was really happy when we started receiving the contributions for the report to see how the work of agencies is pretty much catching up with what we see in scholarship. So in 2021, we published a paper on how topic modeling can be used to visualize patterns in large bodies of antitrust decisions. And in the report, we see how some agencies, notably Australia and Singapore, are indeed already using text analytics to process large volumes of complaints to identify where they should target their resources and which industries are the most problematic. Now, indeed, this is not necessarily targeted towards their past decisions, as you mentioned, but I think that since they all by now have produced electronic records of their databases, they have the resources to do that too, as you mentioned. You said in the beginning that, actually in the previous question, that we see most of the work being done in the area of collusive practices. And that actually makes a lot of sense, since we've seen very little enforcement in the area of cartels and a lot of this enforcement being done on the basis of leniency applications. So I get why agencies are working a lot on that, but I would like to see them more investing more resources in merger control. And this is notably since we see a lot of criticisms of the big digital mergers of the past decade. So I think that there's a lot to learn there from our articles on merger control simulations, which explains how computational tools could actually enable such simulations in the future, which would enable us to predict how the market would look like in the post-merger scenario, and to also understand a bit more the market dynamics and how particular remedies would be effective or not in addressing competition concerns. And to end on another note, I think that the agencies are actually not the only ones who could learn from our scholarship. It's also the policymakers. And we see these days a lot of investment in terms of developing more and more per se rules towards digital players. And that's, of course, one way to go about it. But another way to go about it is to actually try to catch up with the digital markets by implementing computational tools. And some of our papers have concrete proposals for that. We have one paper which proposes expanding the definition of monopoly power to take into account data ownership and using computational tools to assess the effects of data ownership in terms of being able to restrain market access. And then, as you mentioned, we also have the paper on the use of microdirectives in merger control, which would enable a switch from using static thresholds and concrete baselines to a predictive system where we try to forecast the effects of mergers. So I think there's a lot to learn for everyone, but I'm wondering whether you agree with me that policymakers should also perhaps have a look at our report.
I certainly do, and I wanted to ask you the question. So this is what you will like to see, but I was wondering, is it likely that we will see that? And actually, I think the answer to this question might be positive, at least in my humble opinion, because I see no reason why it wouldn't be in the best interest of agencies to indeed invest those subjects that you just developed. If we have better merger control, I mean, most agencies will complain that all they can do is merger control. Some of those agencies are complaining publicly about it. Some other agencies are complaining in more private sphere because they don't want to give an impression that they can actually invest in anti-competitive practices. But this is what we see, right? And this is what some of the agencies have been reporting to us. So if we were to indeed invest, let's say, just for the merger control part in computational tools to streamline processes and improve the analysis and maybe help the companies to be better prepared before they pre-notify the merger, of course, this will benefit companies, but also those agencies. So the answer to your question is positive. I think indeed we could see more of that, and I see no reason why we wouldn't see more of that in the future. So yeah, that's my take on it. I suppose you share the same view. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm sure that we will see that work being done in the near future, especially since this report has sort of started a new trend of mutual learning between the agencies and also between the academics themselves. Do you have any final thoughts?
We are very grateful for all the agencies to be part of the project. Some agencies actually were very frank with us and said, well, you know what, we have nothing to disclose this year. So we will certainly take part in the report for the next coming years. But we see very positive reactions. Agencies are asking us to put them in touch behind the scenes. So there is a lot going on. But still, I was very pleasantly surprised that so many agencies will agree to just, give all that to the public and just release this information open source, which again I think is in everyone's best interest because we cannot develop adversarial systems based on this report. So yeah, the final message would be to say thank you. I will also return the question to you, but I'm also interested in hearing where people can follow your work regarding especially your PhD.
Thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk about my own work, which is something academics love. I've already learned that even though I just started my PhD. So I would be very happy if people would follow me on Twitter, where I will definitely share my future scholarship. I'm working on theories of the firm in antitrust, or more precisely, the lack of theories of the firm in antitrust. And I'm also studying the future of the firm, and I hope that I will manage to connect my PhD with computational tools and see how we could potentially leverage such tools to understand how firms work and how firm dynamics change the competition environment. But to answer back to your point, I think it was indeed fantastic to see this much investment by competition agencies in computational tools. It was fantastic to get so many replies. And it was very heartwarming to see how one agency actually thanked us in the report for giving them the chance to have to be part of a network with other agencies and to learn from them. And I think that we are doing fantastic work in that area. And indeed, I'm sure that in the coming years, these reports will continue to grow and will continue to be more and more insightful for the entire antitrust community. So I really think that we are living up to our slogan of changing the future of antitrust.
Let's hope, yes. And something we forgot to mention is that we have the intention of publishing a similar report every year. So this is just the very first one. Of course, being the first, it might be the most important. And this is the only one we have for now because we started the project just in 2021. But yes, you can expect more reports in the coming years. And again, always open access. So yeah, Teodora, it's been a real pleasure to have this public discussion with you after all the private discussions we had all over the past few months. So thank you very much. Take care of yourself. And if you can, someone else too. Bye-bye.
Bye.